When the fortress of Ochakov fell and 25,000 Muslims were slaughtered by the Russian army, a voice was heard inside the imperial palace in Istanbul. Hasan Effendi, the Sultan, said to his physician, "This is your last service to me. You lost your master." That was the final breath of Sultan Abdul Hamid I, the Sultan who died from sorrow. Born in the year 1725, Abdul Hamid was the son of Sultan Ahmed III and Rabia Kermi Kadan Effendi. He spent most of his life behind the walls of Topkapi Palace, waiting, watching, for nearly half a century. When he finally ascended the throne in 1774, the empire he inherited was not the mighty realm of Suleiman or Mehmed. It was scarred by war, humbled by treaties, and weary of both enemies and itself. His reign began with the Treaty of Kaynarca, a peace that was anything but peace. The Ottomans had lost Crimea, a Muslim land that had been part of the Caliphate for 3 centuries. For the first time, an entire Muslim population was separated from the rule of the Sultan. The loss struck deep into the heart of every believer, and though the treaty was signed with ink, it felt to the Sultan like it was written in blood. But even in defeat, as saw wisdom, he declared that the Muslims of Crimea would remain spiritually bound to the Caliphate, that no sword or treaty could sever their faith from the Ummah. In this way, the Sultan preserved a bond that would outlast empires and kings. Sultan Abdul Hamid I was no conqueror with sword in hand. He was a builder, a healer, and a reformer. He rebuilt the navy, brought French engineers to modernize the artillery, and opened the Naval Engineering School, the foundation of today's Istanbul Technical University. He stood beside his soldiers as cannons were cast, and personally inspected the guns and shipyards. When fires broke out across Istanbul, he would rush to the scene himself, for the people believed the flames would not die until the Sultan had arrived. He ran through the burning streets of his capital, his robes darkened with ash, calling to his men, "Save the people first, the buildings later." And when dawn broke, he would order new fountains built where the fire had passed, so that life would flow again where destruction had stood. Abdul Hamid was a sultan of humility. He would disguise himself as a dervish, wandering the markets and narrow streets of Istanbul. He listened to merchants, sailors, beggars, and took notes himself of what he saw. He even accepted invitations to dine in the homes of common men. One evening, he accepted the meal of a humble customs officer, Osman Aga of Beykoz, and later told his ministers among the people, "I find the truth that cannot be found in palaces." He was deeply spiritual, a follower of Sheikh Mehmed Ziyad, Effendi of the Sadi order. He prayed often, gave charity quietly, and spoke little of himself. The people believed he was a wali, a friend of Allah, a sultan who carried mercy in his eyes. But the world beyond, Istanbul had no mercy. In the north, Catherine the Great of Russia dreamed of restoring the Byzantine Empire and carving the Ottoman lands between Russia and Austria. They called it the Greek Project, a plan to divide the House of Osman and raise a Christian emperor in Istanbul. In 1783, Russia invaded Crimea completely, annexing it as an ordinary province of the empire. Abdul Hamid could do nothing but pray and prepare. For years, he resisted calls to war, saying, "If people are to be trampled underfoot, I would rather die." But war came anyway. In 1787, the Ottomans faced both Russia and Austria. At first, the believers prevailed. The Austrian emperor himself barely escaped capture. Abdul Hamid was given the title Ghazi, the veteran sultan, but soon disaster returned. The fortress of Ochakov, in today's Ukraine, fell to the Russian army. 80,000 soldiers surrounded the city. When the gates fell, 25,000 Muslims were put to the sword. When the news reached Istanbul, Sultan Abdul Hamid turned pale. He called for his physician. "Hasan Effendi," he said, "this is your last service to me. You lost your master. He passed away in tears, not from illness, but from heartbreak." He was 64 years old and had ruled for 15. He left behind no empire of new lands, but a legacy of compassion, faith, and humility. He built mosques in Beylerbey, Emagen, and Eminan, a library of rare books and fountains that still flow today. He repaired the holy sites in Mecca and Medina, and his Arabic poem in praise of the Prophet Muhammad was once hung in the chamber of the Prophet's tomb in Medina. In an age of fire and betrayal, Sultan Abdul Hamid I stood as a reminder that strength is not always in conquest, but in mercy. He was the Sultan who ran to the fires of his people, the ruler who ate at the table of the poor, and the believer who died from grief at the suffering of his Ummah. When est passé, the people said, the Sultan's heart was too soft for this world, and Allah took it back. This was Abdul Hamid I, the Sultan who died from sorrow.